Today I'm going to show you how to use pastels in Procreate. Hi everyone, Steve Elliott here again. I'm going to do a pastel drawing in Procreate and I thought it would be interesting to show you my technique because I've done a few pastel drawings but never really shown you how I've gone about it before and my method. So I always begin by choosing a colour for the background canvas, if you like, and I've chosen a sort of a greyed off blue. If you've done any pastel work at all, you'll know you'll buy a pastel pad and they always come in lots of colours, usually greyed off tints and pastels, so that's why I've put this colour on as the ground there, and that's great because that helps you get the tones right straight away. And I begin straight away with a charcoal block, and I've got it quite big, about maybe 80% size, 100% opacity, and then I'm starting blocking in that sort of bright light in the sky. And you can see I'm doing really big bold strokes. I've got my canvas size set to 24 inch by 16 by 300 dpi. And I'm not put a paper background on this because I like the texture from the charcoal blocks. Plus, I'm finding out if I'm going to start printing more work out, it's great if putting a paper texture on to get an effect if you're using it to be reproduced digitally. But if you're going to get it printed on paper, unless the paper's really flat and you want it to look like a textured paper, then that's fine. But if you are printing it on a quality paper, if you've seen the video I did on the Redbubble papers, the art prints, that paper is such a high quality. I would want to use the texture of that paper, not add one. So that's why I've not put a texture on here. And I'm using the I think I chose the Hockney color palette, so you can get that palette from my downloads section, the free section on my website. If there's a download for palettes by the masters where there's about 12 or something different color palettes you can choose from. Well, if you choose the Hockney one, that was the one I used for this, and I basically just used 4 or 5 colors off it. I didn't use the old palette, and I may adjust the brightness of a color or the saturation on the wheel here and there. But you can see I'm just going on. This is still the first layer, just sort of looking for local color. I'm putting in those reeds on the left hand side there now, and I'm adjusting the size of the brush slightly. Here we're going with a different color. I think at this point, this is where I decide I'm going to use the Hockney palette. So I'm sort of looking for ones that I thought I'd got the color ranging I wanted. And I choose the Hockney because it's got all of these blues, which I thought would be nice for the sky, and a range of sort of pinks and browns that I thought would be useful. Sort of getting in that water with some horizontal strokes there. I make the Hockney palette the default one, so now I don't have to keep going back into the palettes. I could just work from there. And now I'm sort of putting in the darker clouds. That, in actual fact, it's not the clouds there. That is the distant horizon. And I'm using the grey colour from the palette, pretty much as it is. I didn't adjust it. I just selected it from the palette, and I made the brush down, took it down to about 50% size, and I'm just sort of looking at those shapes and just putting in really quick strokes, blocking in colour. And this is, I think I like digital pastels so much. it's probably one of my favourite mediums to use, because if you've ever used pastels in real life, you'll know that they are so dusty, and you just create so much mess, and your hands get so dirty, and it's easy to spoil a piece, that I think working with them digitally, and you do get a really nice result with them. I really like that, because you can walk away at the end of the day and there's hardly any mess at all. So I'm sort of putting a warmer colour in the foreground, and that's basically just to throw that ground forward and add a bit of perspective to the old piece, a bit of aerial perspective where you've got the sort of greyed off colours in the background and the brighter colours in the foreground. So there you can see I selected the colour and then just tweaked it slightly. This is for the sky, and I'm going in, putting in the grey clouds there. Not really worried too much about trying to get the exact shape of the cloud. I'm just putting them in almost like rectangular blocks of colour, just using the shape of that pastel. And I'm liking that effect, and I want to keep it like that. And you'll see me every now and again, I kind of lose the plot a bit and start to become more defined with the drawing, and then I'll undo it, because I don't want to be defined at this stage. I still want to keep everything really, really loose. So you can see I'm starting to fiddle and paint these shapes. And there you go. I'm starting to think, hang on a minute, let's undo that. That's not what I want. I want these blocky shapes at this stage. I don't want to get into detail. So you can see I'm trying to keep that blocky. So that's one thing you want to watch out for, that you're not rushing into the detail. So again, I'm picking a brown and then going into sort of more of the brighter colour, and I'm assuming this is going to be for the sort of sunset. Here I create a new layer, and I'm going to make some fine adjustments to colour. I'm going with a yellow, a creamy colour, just adjust it lightly, make it slightly, make it a little bit lighter, a bit warmer. I choose the more orangey colour, and again this is for the sky. I'm going to go back to my compressed charcoal. You can see I'm just putting that over that light area, just lightening up the sky slightly. I'm building this up really slow, just putting layer on layer of pastel over. I know they're called charcoal brushes, but I feel they're just like pastel. It's like using pastels. You only really get charcoal in black, don't you? So if I was working in black, they would be charcoals, but to me they're working really like pastels. I'm not the opacity down now. That's probably the first time I've done that, just to put a little bit of rim light on those clouds so it's not too much. Little bit of light under them. So they're just beginning. I'm just beginning to think about detail a little bit. You notice I put a warmer colour on the light, and I've sort of pushed that into the water as well. I think the sky, I fiddled around with it so much, and it didn't really come together until I started to get the reeds in and the distant trees. And then at that point, it all came together, and I was sort of wondering if I should get pencils out on it at this point. So I use the eraser there to take some more out. Really fiddling with this a lot. This is the nice thing about the digital thing. You can't do this with, I think at this point, if I'd have done this on a piece of paper, I would have either erased an hole in the middle of the paper by now, or the colour would be so grey and sludgy that it would be ruined. But what I'm doing here, I'm choosing the blending tool, and I'm going to set that to the charcoal block, I believe. All the pastels I'm using are under the charcoal tab. So every brush here, you don't need any special brushes. Everything I'm using are default brushes that come with Procreate. There's nothing fancy, nothing that I've made or tweaked. They're all straight out of the box. So I do a little bit of blending. I said earlier I don't do much blending, but I just wanted to soften the sky a tiny little bit. I also set the eraser to the charcoal block as well. So you can see I've gone back into this blocky sky. So at some point I leave it at that and think that's where I want to be with the sky. I like this blockiness about it. I'm not going for a natural looking effect. It's interesting to watch this back because I didn't realise how much I was fiddling about with it and changing it. So now I'm feeling I need to get some of these darker tones in. So I'm back to that charcoal block, set to about 80%. And then I sort of had a eureka moment where I decide I'm going to use the select tool and use the rectangle shape to draw a rectangle to just get the bottom of these reeds in that I want in the water to get a nice sharp edge. So I selected, I choose the selection tool, there you can see, and at that point you can draw within that selection. And then I put a few more reeds in and pretty much go over everything that I did with the selection. But then I'm thinking, oh, right, now I can do the same thing for the horizon line. So you can see I'm selecting a rectangle there. I then choose the brush, and then I can paint a nice sharp edge with the pastels, and it gives a nice line, and I know it's horizontal for that horizon. So then I decide that I need to paint the shadows in the water that go into that horizon and just leave a tiny little bit of it. So all really built up very slow, this drawing, just sort of laying on charcoal on top of charcoal on top of charcoal, changing the brush size. The only things I changed was the brush size and the opacity. I didn't mess around with anything else at all. And you could have as many layers as you like for this, really. You could, every time you create a new shape, you could be making a new layer. Probably more layers than I actually used on it, although I did in the end I did create a fair few. So it's just beginning to take shape now. push that brush size up to about 90%. And then I choose the freehand drawing tool on the selection area, because I want to draw the bank, so I can put some reeds in that and have this nice sharp edge at the side of the bank. You can see I can sort of paint into that, and it gives us this nice sharp edge. So that was quite a nice technique that made it really easy to do that. That's something that I've not really done before, so I'll be doing that a lot more often, I think. I really enjoyed doing this, to be honest. It was just sort of one evening, I was sort of sat on my own, and I thought, I just fancy doing a little bit of drawing. I thought, I've not used the iPad all week. I've been messing about on my Cintiq 16, and I've been around a mate's house. We've been recording a bit of music in the afternoon, so that was fun. And I just felt like I just wanted to do a drawing, and I got this in mind. As I say, I thought I was just gonna start it and do a pretty detailed piece with lots of pencil work. And in the end, I just sat listening to music, really peaceful, and knocked this out in an hour. And I was really, really, really pleased with it. So I've got now a kind of a nice pale yellow, and I'm flicking in these reeds, and you'll notice I go right to the edge of the canvas with it, which is not really what I want him to be doing. I think I picked the soft charcoal there. So I just sort of start off looking at these reeds and putting in lines, and you can see they're all pretty much pointing in the same direction. There's sort of a little bit of a gap between them, which is pretty similar. They're all pretty much the same width. So this is because I'm still into this blocky thing. But now I'm thinking it's time I need to think a little bit more about the detail. I don't know if I start on these reeds and do that yet, or if I go into the background a bit more. Now it looks like I'm doing it now. So I start to think, yeah, all these reeds, they're not all pointing the same way. Some are sort of leaning to the left, others are going to the right. Some of them are overlapping one another. And I'm still doing them all a little bit similar at this point. A bit like scales on a fish or a snake or something like that. So watching this back, you can see the sort of mistakes I'm making. I do correct it, obviously. So I'm into a new layer now. I pick a blue, and then I want it to be a bit darker. Yeah, I think I decide that I need that horizon line a little bit lower, and you can see I've created a rectangle to get that nice sharp edge again using the selection tool. Selected that rectangle, and then I'm changing the colour up a little bit, mixing it so it's not all the same. I don't want it to be dull. Let's get some reds in there. So I'm picking the colours off that colour palette, but then making them darker. I wanted the reeds to really pop, you see, so that's why I've gone in with this dark colour. Back to the charcoal block. And then I need to soften that edge up a little bit, make it a bit softer for the reflections in the water. just flicking a few strokes down. I love the way the pastels, it really does work like a pastel, and you get that sort of soft water effect without any effort at all, really. Well, if we look at the reeds, I'll just talk about that for a minute. The reeds that they sort of start at the edge of the canvas and go nearly to the centre, I felt that it was just too much, and eventually I put some dark colour into the left hand side of the reeds. I go right up and cover those reeds up, and then just leave a few of them with the bright highlights that are being lit by the sun. Notice them broad strokes that went into the foreground. I'm not into detail. I don't want to be picking out stones. Oh, you can't see any anyway because there's none in the photo. So I just wanted to make a mark and then that'd be it. I didn't want to get bogged down with that kind of detail. So I'm setting the brush fairly small, about 25%, and I'm back into them reeds again now. What I'm intending to do, I'm sort of putting in a block of the light colour, and then I'm going to draw over the top of them. At this point, I decide I need to zoom in a little bit to actually make them look like the reeds. So this is where I'm now starting to think about detail somewhat. As you can see, I'm starting to overlap colours, got different sizes. So I've made the charcoal really small. I've chosen the grey colour, and I'm now starting to put the, I guess it's the shadows that are the near side of these reeds, sketching them in. And you notice it was quick then, but I did change the colour because I don't want them all exactly the same colour or tone. I want to mix it up a bit and add a little bit of variety in there. So there's some that I've done as brown, dark greys, blues, totally mixing it up. Making them different thicknesses, and it's really important that you don't fall into the trap of making them all the same size, the same height, the same gap between them. It's surprising me how slow I'm actually doing this. It felt like when I was drawing it, I was going a lot quicker. So I think I'm just going to fast forward a bit till these reeds are all in, because this is going to take quite a while. You'll notice here that I'm using the eraser as well, just to sculpt out a little bit of form into those reeds, and then I go back in and finishing them. Now at that point, I had a long look at it and thought, these reeds are going way too far. The bright of the tops are way too far over coming out of the painting on the left. So then I decide to knock them back a bit, so radically get a larger brush and just whack some colour into those reeds. So I'm losing all the detail and those highlights that are on the left hand side. I felt I wanted to keep them more central to the canvas, and I didn't need them. They were distracting, taking your eye out of the painting. So that's why I've done that. And I'm sampling colours off the canvas there. I've got my Procreate set up so that I have to put a finger on that little square in between the two slider bars. Then I can touch the canvas with the pen for a few seconds and it picks the colour up. That way I don't pick colour up by accident. I then decide that I need more reeds coming across. I felt I'd got the picture where you could take a pair of scissors and almost cut those reeds off, and I wanted them to come further along into the painting, and I wanted to put a little warm glow on the water. You saw me pencil that in or sketch it in and do the same slightly in the sky, and I'm now putting a warmer colour into the sky as well. So this really is a painting of layers where I'm sort of overlaying colour on top of colour, and I just love that sort of squareness of that compressed stick. That's a bit heavy, that stroke, that had to come out. But you can still see the blue below the pink, so you're almost mixing colours on the canvas with the pastels. So you can see I've made the or put in the white ground for some more reeds, and I'm going to make my brush much smaller and then just put those new reeds in. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap between the them and the ones to the left. And I think here you'll see better how I'm going to take the eraser in a minute and sculpt around the light colour to add a little bit of form to those reeds. There we go. I've just selected the eraser, and you can see I'm just sort of erasing away, taking away the edge of that white, so it just acts like a little rim light around the reed. This is about as much detail as I get into in this painting, really. So you'd really struggle with this with conventional pastel at this point. You might be able to lift the white away, but you'd certainly be smudging the colour underneath it. Whereas obviously digitally that isn't a problem. That layer underneath isn't touched. So I obviously feel like I need even more reeds coming across. It took me a while to come up with this technique of sort of whacking down a light colour and then putting the dark shaded side in and then sculpting it away with the eraser, but I think it works really well. Yeah, so it's all coming together quite nicely. I'm liking the sky. I think it's everything's blending in quite well at this point. And I'm just fiddling around with the thickness of the charcoal stick just to get that exact right stroke I want for these reeds. And it's important that I flick these in with one stroke. I don't want sort of jaggedly drawing them in. They've got to be put in confidently with one sort of stroke of that pen. Unfortunately, I don't go quite down to that bank, which is what I end up doing in the end, is where I feel it needs to go. There we are. I think now I've made this decision. You'll notice that maybe when I was doing that, I was thinking I was going to put that little bit of a jetty thing in. That's for like a fisherman to sit on and get right close to the water and fish. But I didn't want that sort of man-made object in the painting. I wanted it to look almost as, you know, sort of close to nature as I could get, with no obvious signs of man anywhere about. So that's why I left that out. It not really for any aesthetic reason. I suppose I could have put it in and it would have been all right. You noticed I flicked that stem into the reed that takes it right down to the bank. Now I don't know what these things are. There's some sort of oh, I took that out. That surprised me. Oh, there it goes back in again. I think I undid that. Changing this to the 6B compressed charcoal, I think. No. Yeah, 6B compressed charcoal for those little round things. It's nice, soft edge to it. And then flicking those stems in, they've got to be done with one stroke. You can't fiddle about with it. You've got to get them in with confidence. You'll notice as well that I changed the colour a lot on those reeds. They're not all the same. I don't want them all blue. So we've got some brown, some blue. Always zooming in and out. That's really, a lot of artists sort of flick the canvas over horizontal to make sure that everything's going right. I tend to zoom out and look at the thumbnail version of something. I'm doing the same sort of thing. There we are. That's better with the reeds. I'm sort of taking them down to that bank, finishing them off at the edge of the bank. I can use the eraser just to clean them all up there. You notice I clean it all up so they all finish in the right place. So that's getting pretty close to the reeds being finished. At this point, I know that I'm not going to need to do much pencil work on this. And this is going to be a pastel drawing in its own right. I don't want to. I'm loving the softness of it. I'm loving the lighting effects I get. So I create a new layer. But I do. I'm sort of looking at those distant tree line. And I do feel I want to put some branches in. So I go to the sketching tools and choose a 6B pencil. Just because I just want to get those really thin lines in for those distant trees. So I'm zooming in here, and you can see I start flicking in. Getting the thickness just right is important. I felt I was too thick. First it was too thin. The actual, you can see the brown pastel underneath where I'm drawing, and that's kind of giving me an idea of where I need to take those pencil lines to. And indeed those pastel marks are like tiny little twigs, if you like, on the trees. In my mind, that's what I'm seeing. I zoomed out then just to make sure I was liking what I was getting. It was okay. This is the only pencil work I do on the whole of the sketch. Just for these branches, just to flick these in. You've got to make sure that when you do these, you let pencil lines overlap each other. I have an habit of, when I'm drawing tree branches and things, that I can, if I'm not careful, I can draw them all, and there's a gap between everyone, and all the gaps the same. And you know, the trees aren't like that. They're all sort of entwined and overlapping, and you've got to do that when you're sketching as well. And although they look like they're being flicked in randomly, you really do have to think about where you're going with them, and you let them overlap and entwine. And I'm really liking that effect that I'm getting there now. I just need that clump of trees that are directly below the highlighted sky. So you can see I'm starting to put them in now. It's important that you vary the gaps between them. You don't make them all the same height. When I was teaching, I'd see a lot where people would put in a line of trees, and they would all be exactly the same height, the same gap between them. And it's something I used to point out a lot, but still people would still do that. I know the actual tree on the photo looks a lot dense, and I'm sort of putting these twigs in, but I have got in mind that I'm going to go back into the charcoal on the layer underneath and take a wide brush and flick some marks up to make those branches, or that clump of trees, a little bit denser. It's unusual for me to go in and put detail into something like this that is clearly such a loose looking painting. So I'm going back to my charcoal now, choosing that compressed charcoal, going to the layer below it, and you can see I've picked a dark grey colour, sampled it off the screen, just flicking those lines in, and it just makes that look so much more dense. And you can do it so quick and easy. You don't have to draw in every single branch and twig. Just putting some darks behind those reeds, taking advantage of that at the minute, just to make them pop a bit. Taking it down to a thumbnail again, so I can have a good look, make sure that I'm happy with where I'm getting the darks and the lights. And I'm feeling that I need maybe something else in the foreground at some point. So here we go. I'm going on the top layer, and the reason I did that was I just wanted to make sure that I'm above everything that's already on there. So, oh, and then I choose the burnt tree charcoal, and this, for me, choosing this particular brush brought the whole thing to life. And I've never used this before. I thought I'll just try that, and it put on this texture of I imagine having a really chalky pastel where you touch it and it just drops loads and loads of chalk onto the texture of the paper. And straight away I fell in love with this brush, and you can see I can almost touch that charcoal on there. And I decided I need to use that to as a texture to add the detail in the foreground, if you like, without actually having to draw any. I could do it with this brush, and I just put some broad strokes in there. I mix up the colour a little bit. I choose a green. Just put just a few strokes in there, and that just totally throws that forward. So even though there's no detail in the photo, it's almost black, I'm just sort of varying the colour to add a little bit of interest. Everything's a very similar tone. They're all dark. If it was black and white, it would look like one colour almost. But just by choosing different colours, it adds a bit of variety into that really dark area. I love that. I totally love that brush. I think it's has become within the first two strokes of using it, one of my favourite brushes, and I think I will be using that one a lot. So that is called the burnt tree brush, and it's in the charcoal section. And now I'm just using the eraser just to lift out some of those marks. I realised that somehow the eraser got set back to the watercolour brush, so I just set it back to the compressed charcoal just to lift out a few of those marks so you can see the reeds again. You could do that on the drawing with a putty rubber. I sort of tried putting a mark in there and didn't like it. I do use the eraser to add a little bit more detail into that shaded area by lifting out a few reeds, but I don't think I do it just yet. I think I do it a little bit later on. But it was kept playing on my mind that I'd got all this nice colour there, but there was it was flat. It needed something just to give it a little bit of definition. So I'm back into that burnt tree. Cracking brush. And then I'm thinking this could be really cool to use in the sky, just to start adding a few details in there. So take the size of it down quite considerably. Just start popping in a few highlights. Straight away, I know this is going to work. So I'm continually adjusting the size of it. just pressing on really lightly, and it's almost as if it's catching the grain of the paper. I was very happy with the painting before I discovered this brush, but this to me was what really just set it apart and added the finishing touches to it, and really gave it that pastel look. I used the eraser there just to lift off some of the colour because it's on its own layer, and just by putting the eraser over it, it's just sort of softened it a little bit without taking it out completely. So I'm now totally obsessed with this brush, and I'm going in drawing little bits of detail in those clouds. Keep zooming in and out, just checking that I'm happy with what's happening. Softening it off again with the eraser. So it's not blending it. I could have used a blending brush, but I didn't want to blend it. I just wanted to soften it. Then I use it to lift, just put a few really sharp sparkles onto, not all the wreaths, just a few of them. So I'm fine-tuning it here. I'm just sort of putting these last details into the piece. I'm just thinking that the sky to the right hand side just needs a little bit of something. So I choose a grey colour and then just sculpt in a little bit more of the edge of those clouds. I didn't want it to be too bright. And then just make the brush big and put a brush stroke where it's just dragged over those, over the sky, and just adds a little bit of texture there. There we go. I'm working in the top part of the clouds, just adding a little bit of rim light there with a nice soft grey. Nothing too strong, very soft. Zoom out again to the thumbnail view, zooming in. People ask me a lot, it looks like a lot of the time when I'm working, I don't zoom in much. And my answer to that is I tend to zoom in to its life size. What I mean by life size, I mean the actual canvas would be how I would imagine it to be printed out. So I'm not zooming into detail and drawing detail that you can't see when you print it out. So I would zoom into something that would be about the same size as if you was working on a real sheet of paper. But I don't rarely zoom in any more than that. I'm not into going in crazy tight and putting in loads and loads and loads of detail. Here I've just chosen a darker grey and adding a little bit more depth to those clouds. Just making them look a little bit more organic now and not quite so squared off as there was when I first started putting in those initial strokes. And I'm not so sure if I would have managed this if I hadn't have discovered that burnt tree brush. It just totally worked for me. It just felt so right. So I'm just sort of softening away, adding little bits of colour here and there, checking it, making sure I like what's happening. So as you can see, I'm not the kind of person that will work solely on a sky and finish it and then move on and work the way down the painting. I will try and build the whole thing up as I'm going all the time, and there's several points in the painting where you could say it's finished. You could say it's finished now, I suppose, but I'm just keep tweaking it and working it, and I'm looking at the whole thing all the time, just making sure everything's balanced. Into a new layer here. I think this might be for the signature. Yeah, I've just chose the pencil. So it's time to sign it. I must be happy with this. Something's going off there. I was wondering if it was the right colour or... So I generally always put the signature on one layer separate. Then I can change the opacity of it. So it doesn't stand out so much, which is what I do here. I can change the size of it if I want to. It gives me a lot of flexibility. So I generally tend to keep that signature on its own layer. I left it for a bit, and then I kept looking at it and thinking that in the left side, that block of colour just needs something. It's got no form. So I decided to go in with an eraser, go onto that layer with all those dark colours, and you can see I'm just lifting out some of that colour. It's very subtle, but you can see reeds starting to, the stems of the reeds starting to appear as I lift out bits of colour. There we go. You can see that there. I'm lifting. It looks like I'm drawing it in, but in actual fact, I'm lifting out that light colour, leaving the dark colour, the dark blue below it to show those reeds, just to add that final touch to it. This is getting really close to finish now. Really happy with it. Few more little bits where I'm erasing. This is erasing, it's not drawing in. I could have chosen a lighter colour there and drawn it in, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to use the eraser to lift some colour out. I just feel that that is such a nice, subtle effect that I'm getting... notifications here from Discord. Sorry about that bleeping away. There we go. A few more lines flicked in, or taken out, I should say. And there we go. That is pretty much it. There we go. One finished painting. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you followed along with it and had a go yourself. If you have, I'd love to see what you've done. So you can get in touch with me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and send me your pictures. That would be great. I'd love to see them. In the meantime, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because I have lots of videos like this, and I would love to be sharing them with you. Oh, and don't forget, if you enjoyed the video, big thumbs up as always, much appreciated, and hopefully I will see you all in the next one. Bye!